Jude Bellingham stood in the Miami humidity on Saturday night with his arms stretched out wide, having just scored the goal that put England into a World Cup semifinal. Extra time, 2-1, his second of the night. 11 months earlier, that same player was left out of an England squad. Not rested, not injured, left out. And in the weeks before this tournament, an entire country held a genuine, serious, grown-up debate about whether Jude Bellingham should even be in the plane. The distance between those two facts, the squad snub in October and the arms outstretched in Miami in July, is the story of this World Cup. And the uncomfortable part, the part nobody wants to sit with now, is that the evidence was always there. You were warned about Jude Bellingham. This video is about why the warning went unheard and what happened when it came true. To understand how we got here, you need to understand what was supposed to happen. The assumption heading into 2026 was that England's number 10 position was a problem of abundance. Too many candidates. Too many profiles. Thomas Tuchel arrived with his own hierarchy and his own ideas, and Bellingham, the boy who had carried Real Madrid to a title at 20, who had been anointed the future of English football before he could legally drink in the country hosting this tournament, was suddenly negotiable. Tuchel challenged him publicly, more than once, in press conferences, on the record, in a way managers almost never do with their best players, and the football world took the manager's side. The narrative hardened quickly. His form had dipped. His body language was wrong. The system might function better without him. It never sounded like doubt. That's the thing. It sounded like analysis. It always does. That is not what happened. What happened instead is one of the great individual tournaments in the history of this competition. And the way it happened matters because it didn't arrive as one explosion. It arrived as a pattern, game after game, the same shape, until the pattern became impossible to call coincidence. Start with Panama in the group stage. A tight, airless match, the exact kind England have historically failed to solve. Bellingham scores to make it 1-0, then creates the second 5 minutes later. The game is decided inside a quarter of an hour of his intervention. Nobody pays much attention. It's Panama, then Croatia. England are in a genuine fight, and the score is level going into the second half. The goal that puts them ahead for good, 3-2, comes from the same player. Again, the conversation moves on quickly. Again, the pattern registers with almost nobody. Then, the Azteca, the round of 16 against co-host Mexico in the single most hostile venue this tournament has to offer. Altitude, heat, 100,000 people, and a stadium with more World Cup ghosts than any building on earth. This is the fixture where reputations get audited. Bellingham scored twice in roughly 90 seconds, 2 goals, a minute and a half apart in the first half to silence the Azteca and swing the entire match. But here's the detail that actually matters, the one the highlight packages buried. With the score at 2-1 and Mexico surging just before halftime, Bellingham made a sliding, last-ditch tackle inside his own 6-yard box to stop a certain equalizer. His own assessment afterwards was that the tackle mattered as much as the goals. Think about what that sentence means. The team's most gifted attacking player, its goal scorer, producing the defensive play of the match at the moment the game was tilting. England went down to 10 men in the second half when Kwanzaa was sent off and still survived 3-2. Take Bellingham out of that night and England are not in the quarterfinals. That is not an opinion, it's arithmetic. And then Norway, Saturday, Miami. Conditions so brutal that England's own goalkeeper said they were harder than the Azteca. Norway had just eliminated Brazil. Erling Haaland arrived carrying 7 goals and a fairy tale. And in the 36th minute, Andreas Schjelderup bent in a strike from distance that made the fairy tale feel inevitable. England were losing, and for long stretches, England were second best. Right before halftime, at the exact moment the match was slipping, Bellingham drove into the box, took one immaculate first touch off Anthony Gordon's pass, shaped the shot with 2 more, and buried the equalizer. One action and the momentum of a World Cup quarterfinal reversed. The second half belonged mostly to Norway. A VAR review saved England once when Hegem's goal was ruled out for Haaland's shove in the build-up. And then, 3 minutes into extra time, Morgan Rogers hit a routine shot from distance. The Norwegian keeper spilled it, and one player, the only player, reacted first. A poacher's finish. 2-1. England held on. 4 times in 6 games at this World Cup, Jude Bellingham has been the difference between England advancing and England going home. Not a contributor to the difference. The difference. And when Tuchel, the man who spent a year publicly challenging him, was asked about him after the Norway game, the manager's resistance finally collapsed into 2 words: world class. While all of that was happening on the pitch, something else was happening in the record books. And the numbers deserve to be read slowly because each one is heavier than it first appears. 6 goals, level with Harry Kane as England's top scorer at this tournament. In the entire history of the Men's World Cup, only 3 English players have ever scored 5 or more at a single edition. Gary Lineker in 1986, Kane, and now Bellingham. That is the complete list. 40 years of English football, 3 names. 5 of those 6 goals either leveled a match or put England in front. 3 of them gave England leads they never surrendered. He is not decorating comfortable wins. Every goal is load-bearing. Every single one arrived at a moment when the game was genuinely in question. Then there is the record that changes the register of this conversation entirely. Bellingham has now scored braces in back-to-back World Cup knockout games. The last man to do that was Diego Maradona. Read that back slowly, not the last Englishman, the last human being, Maradona. And the age detail is somehow more absurd. At 23 years and 12 days old, Bellingham became the second youngest player ever to score 2 or more goals in successive World Cup knockout matches. The only player who did it younger was Pelé in 1958 at 17. So the 2 reference points for what is happening right now, the only available comparisons, are Pelé and Maradona. Not England's golden generation, not Gascoigne or Rooney or Gerrard, the 2 players who sit at the very top of the sport's memory. One more number because it explains what England actually are. Kane and Bellingham have scored 12 of England's 13 goals at this World Cup. 12 of 13. This is not a deep, balanced machine sharing the load across a squad. This is a team with 2 sources of goals, and one of them is the 23-year-old that half the country spent last autumn trying to argue off the plane. Even Gary Neville, a man who watched Gascoigne in 1990, Owen in 1998, Rooney in 2004, from inside those squads and those eras, said out loud that he has never seen a single player impact a tournament the way Bellingham is impacting this one. Never. That is not a hot take from a stranger. That is the institutional memory of English football conceding the point. So the question worth asking is not whether Bellingham is delivering. That argument is over. The question is how an entire football culture talked itself out of him in the first place. And there are 3 honest answers. The first is that we confuse quiet with decline. Bellingham went through a stretch where he wasn't dominating headlines and the industry decided a peak had passed rather than paused. Football media has a short memory and total confidence, and that combination produces verdicts long before it produces evidence. The second is that the friction with Tuchel became the story, and when a manager publicly challenges a superstar, choosing the manager's side feels sophisticated. Here is the version nobody wants to say out loud. Both things may be true at once. The criticism was overcooked, and it may also have lit the fuse. Tuchel poked at his best player for a year, and his best player has responded by devouring a World Cup. The challenge and the answer belong to the same story. The third answer is the deepest one. England fans are trained for heartbreak. Decades of golden generations ending in penalties taught an entire culture that believing in its best players is how you get hurt. Doubt became armor. It felt safer to question Bellingham than to trust him, because trust has a history in that country, and the history is painful, but armor has a cost. Sometimes it makes you miss the exact moment a generational player arrives in full bloom. That moment is now, and it was visible months ago to anyone willing to look at the pattern instead of the noise. There is one image from this tournament that risks getting buried under the records, and it might be the most important one. In the first half against Norway, before the equalizer, the cameras caught Bellingham with his hands on his knees, gasping. The altitude of the Azteca 5 days earlier had emptied England's legs, and his most of all, because no one had run more, fought more, or carried more. He was, visibly, a tired 23-year-old in brutal humidity in a match his team was losing, and from that state, not fresh, not flying, but drained, he produced the equalizer before halftime and the winner in extra time. That sequence is the whole story in miniature. He is not a machine absorbing pressure without feeling it. He was exhausted. England were losing. The fairy tale on the other side had already eaten Brazil, and he answered anyway. Twice. That is what the doubters never priced in. Not the talent, the refusal, which brings us to Wednesday. Atlanta, England against Argentina for a place in the final. On one side, Lionel Messi, the defending champion, chasing back-to-back World Cups in his country's 6th consecutive semifinal, writing the final pages of the greatest career the sport has produced. On the other, a 23-year-old whose last 2 knockout games have only ever been matched by Pelé and Maradona, carrying a nation that has not won this tournament since 1966. There are people who will say Argentina's experience decides this, that champions know how to survive these nights and they needed extra time themselves to put away 10-man Switzerland. Those points are real. Argentina are the champions for a reason, and this England side, by its own manager's admission, makes life difficult for itself. But consider what both of those facts actually predict. A tight match, decided late, in one exhausted, chaotic moment. And late, exhausted, chaotic moments are precisely where this entire video has taken place. An equalizer on the stroke of halftime. A winner 3 minutes into extra time. A brace in 90 seconds to flip the most hostile stadium in the hemisphere. If Wednesday comes down to one loose ball in the 110th minute, you already know from 6 games of evidence which player arrives first. This is not a prediction that England win. It is something narrower and harder to argue with. The doubt era is over. The player England nearly talked itself out of has spent a month producing the kind of tournament that gets measured against Pelé and Maradona. And on Wednesday, he walks into a semi-final against Messi himself. The past and the future of the number 10 on the same pitch with a final at stake. 11 months ago, he couldn't make a squad. On Wednesday, he might end the reign of the greatest player who ever lived. You were warned. If this video did the job, hit subscribe, because the England-Argentina breakdown is coming before kickoff and this story is 2 games from its ending.